This event took place back when I was in college, long before cell phones existed. I was an undergrad at a school in the Appalachian Mountains. The school was in a small town, and I quickly realized that the locals, or townies, didn't much care for us students. I was a junior at the time, and it happened during a cold winter. I had heard a story about a certain townie who liked to frequent a popular bar called the Club. It was a place where both students and townies hung out. According to the story, this guy would come out on Saturday nights to pick on students. The previous weekend, he had sat down uninvited at a table where some students were drinking beer. He just sat there, silent and unwelcome. Eventually, he grabbed the thigh of a male student. When the student told him to let go, the townie assaulted them. The students ended up in the hospital because of the beating. The owner of the bar, also a townie, did nothing about it. The next Saturday night, I told my buddies we should teach this jerk a lesson. My dad had raised me not to be a victim and to look out for my friends. I played pool and poker to help pay for school, so I knew how to handle myself. I had heard that the townie liked to punch his victims in the solar plexus, so I taped some magazines around my torso with electrical tape. I also put an empty Coke bottle in my jacket pocket. Around 10 p.m., we headed to the bar and got a table, leaving one chair empty beside me. We were enjoying a pitcher of Pabst when one of my friends told me that he was there. We made sure not to look at him and kept on drinking. Eventually, he came over and sat down in the empty chair beside me. Casually, I turned to look at him and smiled. Sure enough, he immediately grabbed me by the leg. "Hey there, fella," I said, smiling as I took another sip of beer. He had a hard grip on my thigh as he stared back at me, not saying a word. "Well, you certainly aren't a shy one," I said, and my friends all laughed. It grew silent. Everyone in the bar was watching now. I had a nice pinch of Copenhagen snuff between my cheek and gums. I spit into one of his eyes, causing him to close both involuntarily. Immediately, I punched him in the throat as hard as I could, knocking the creep backward. He fell out of his seat, landing flat on his ass. "Take it outside," yelled the owner from behind the bar. We stepped out into the back alley, followed by the townie. His eyes blazed with anger as he came towards me quickly. He took a quick swing, which I blocked as I pulled out the Coke bottle, gripping it by the neck. I swung hard, landing a savage blow against his thick skull. I felt it connect with a satisfying thud. His head snapped back, and he stumbled. I kicked his legs out from under him, then we circled around him and started kicking him with our steel-toed Doc Martens. He tried to get up, but we just kept on kicking him as hard as we could, working up a good sweat. He must have tried not to yell or scream, but soon enough, he was crying like a baby. This went on for quite a while until we eventually heard sirens approaching. "Let's go!" I shouted, and we ran out of there as fast as we could. Later, we heard that an ambulance had come to the bar to take the unconscious townie away on a stretcher. Needless to say, we didn't return to the club anytime soon. The next year, I went back once and saw a townie sitting in a wheelchair beside the bar. He looked like the guy but wasn't so big anymore and trembled a lot. He eventually looked my way and immediately broke eye contact. He never said a word. Oh well, I thought, he brought it on himself. There are consequences to your actions. Let's move to the next story. I hope you are liking them. A few years ago, I went with my friend and his family to spend the weekend at a rural house. We did a lot of activities together, but my friend and I also took some walks around the area. The house was in the middle of nowhere, deep in the countryside of a Spanish village, far from any other houses. One day, we decided to go on a longer hike, exploring the area more. We walked for about an hour from the house we were staying in. It was a windy day. We found an old house that seemed abandoned, but everything was closed up tight. My friend went around one side, and I went around the other. When I met up with my friend at the front, I heard something. Nah, it's just the wind, I thought. But then I heard it again, much clearer this time. I looked at my friend's face, and we both knew we were thinking the same thing. We heard a girl crying. There was literally nothing around us for miles, so the sound had to be coming from the old storage house, which was closed up like a bunker. When we looked at each other, we automatically started walking back to our house without talking much about it. We're not the type of people who like to exaggerate stories to make them more interesting. That night, we went to sleep with the image of that house in our minds, and the sound of a crying girl echoed in our heads. Even after many years, it still haunts us. The man in the woods. When I was 14, my cousin and I used to play in the front yard all the time. We lived in the countryside, so there wasn't much around except trees and more trees. One afternoon, we were playing Nerf, having a blast. I glanced towards the woods and saw someone standing there. This person was wearing a blue t-shirt and shorts, just standing still like a T-pose or a penguin, watching us. At first, I thought I was imagining things. It was weird because that part of the woods was usually empty. I called my cousin over to see if he noticed anything. He took one look and bolted towards the house. Confused, I ran after him. Once inside, I asked, "Why'd you run?" He looked really scared and said he had pitch black eyes. It creeped me out. I was stunned. I thought maybe the person needed help or something. I convinced my cousin to come back with me to check it out, but when we got there, the person was gone. That wasn't the only strange thing that happened. A few times, I heard my mom calling my name when no one was home. It freaked me out, but I brushed it off as my imagination. Another time, I heard crying, but I was home alone. That really got to me. One incident that stands out was when my grandma said she saw me go into the kitchen. I was in my room the whole time. She insisted she saw me, but when she checked, no one was there. My brother also experienced something similar. He thought he saw me walk down the hallway to his room, but I was nowhere near him. These weird occurrences kept happening. It was unsettling to feel like something was watching or mimicking me. I never figured out who or what it was, but those experiences stayed with me. Even now, thinking back on it gives me chills. Living in the countryside, you expect peace and quiet, but sometimes it feels like there's something else out there, something we can't quite explain. Whether it was a person playing tricks or something more supernatural, I still wonder about that figure in the woods and the Snapchat mystery. A few months ago, I was outside in my garden, just shooting some hoops and listening to my Spotify playlist through my headphones. Out of the blue, my friend sent me a Snapchat with a funny filter. Naturally, I decided to snap back. When I opened the app, it was on the camera, so I flipped it to face me. That's when I heard it, a deep voice mumbling words. The only ones I could make out were underdog and open. At first, I thought Spotify was glitching, so I paused my music. But when I reopened the Snapchat camera, the same mumbling voice came through again. This time, I caught a few more words, drive and toxic. I had no clue what those words meant or how they connected. I decided to ignore it since it didn't happen again for a while. 2 months passed without incident, and I forgot about the whole thing. But then it started happening every time I opened the Snapchat camera with the volume on. That same deep, mumbling voice would come through. It's genuinely creepy and puzzling. I don't know how or why it's happening. If anyone has any ideas or has experienced something similar, please let me know. It's starting to freak me out. The shadow in the living room. This literally just happened, and it freaked me out. For context, I live with my dad, and he really doesn't like it when I fall asleep in the living room, which I did tonight by accident. I got woken up by my dad shaking me and calling my name, telling me to go sleep in my room. It was weird, though. He was all black, like a shadow, and I couldn't see any features. But I recognized his voice, and my barely awake brain didn't think anything of it. He then walked outside and left for work. I gathered my stuff to go to my room, but when I got there, I saw my dad sleeping in his bed. Cold shivers ran down my neck and back. This kind of thing had never happened to me before. I turned off the light and was about to close my door when I heard footsteps. They didn't sound familiar at all. You know how, when you live with people, you can tell who's walking by the sound of their steps. These steps were heavy and fast, coming from the front door. I slammed my door shut, locked it, and ran to my bed. Now, I'm a grown man hiding under my blankets. I know it's probably my mind playing tricks on me, but it's still terrifying. This is my first time experiencing something this realistic and creepy. There's no way I'm sticking my toes out from under the blanket tonight. The last thing I want is something sucking on them while I try to sleep, which I probably won't be able to do now. The Forest Creep in Flitwick. Hello everyone, there's a town in Bedfordshire called Flitwick, and I've lived here my whole life. I don't usually post on here, but I felt like I should because when I asked my friends about this, they all said they've experienced similar things. So, there's this forest near my friend's house, and during a sleepover, I saw some weird stuff. We decided to sneak into one of the old abandoned sheds in the forest to have a few puffs of our vapes. After a while, we kept hearing someone laughing in the distance, but we couldn't see anyone, so we just carried on. We stopped for a bit to have another puff, but we were getting paranoid because we kept hearing twigs snapping. We guessed it was just the nicotine rush making us jumpy. We got to the edge of the forest and were about to open the gate when my friend stopped and said, "You see that?" There was a random person standing there, just staring at us. But this wasn't a normal person. He looked like a bootleg Jeff the Killer. He had shoulder-length black hair, a white hoodie or jumper, and a carved red smile. We could make out his face, but my friend's crappy iPhone didn't have great resolution. Still, you could see his features. After a few seconds of staring at this guy, he started flailing his arms like a lunatic. We were scared out of our minds. Then he stopped and began cranking his head around in a creepy way. My friend took a picture of him, which seemed to anger him. He started bolting toward us, and we ran for it. He was probably about 7 to 8 meters away from us. We skedaddled out of the forest and back to my friend's house, which is just down the road from the forest. It was already starting to get dark, so we tried to forget about it, but it was hard. If anyone else in Flitwick has experienced something like this, please share. It's creepy knowing there might be someone or something out there in the forest.